My wife mocked me as so dramatic. Revenge exposed her inheritance lies and reclaimed $33 million. What do you mean all my cards are frozen? I have $33 million. Do you know who I am? Yeah, you're the woman who traded love for a lifestyle she couldn't afford. My father-in-law, Richard, was dying from pancreatic cancer, a ruthless illness that takes no prisoners. He was the definition of a self-made man, started with nothing and built a fortune worth $33 million through sheer grit and drive. Big house in the hills, several businesses, all of it. I spent night after night at his side in those last months, listening to his stories and watching old movies together. My wife, Sarah, barely showed up unless she wanted money for another yoga trip or shopping binge. Richard and I had a real bond. He cared about my goals and listened in a way my own wife never did. About 6 months before he got really sick, we were in his study sharing good whiskey when he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Darian, you're a good man. Better than this family deserves, if I'm honest." At the time, I chalked it up to the whiskey, but those words would stick with me later. When Richard finally passed, I hoped seeing her father fade away would teach Sarah something about loss, about what actually matters. I already knew that pain. 5 years earlier, I'd lost both my parents in a car crash. That grief almost broke me apart, left me questioning everything. Sarah's reaction then, let's just say supportive wouldn't be the word. More like she was slightly annoyed at my collapse. I thought Richard's passing might change her, that it would finally force her to face mortality, family, and the heavy truths that make people shift their priorities. But instead, she treated the inheritance like a spoiled kid waking up on Christmas morning to find the whole toy store under the tree. The will reading was a farce. Sarah sat there in a fancy black dress worth more than most people's rent, smirking like she already knew what was coming. When the lawyer said she was getting it all, the house, the money, the businesses, she didn't even flinch, just gave a little nod, like it was always hers to begin with. That's when things turned ugly fast. Within days, my once loving wife became someone I could hardly recognize. The woman I married 7 years ago, the one who laughed at my dumb jokes and stole fries from my plate, was gone. In her place stood a cold, sharp stranger who looked at me like I was dirt on her shoe. The mansion turned into her throne, and I was nothing more than a leftover. She began dropping hints that I should go find my own way now that she was set for life. In her mind, inheriting millions gave her a license to treat me like spoiled milk. Then came that evening, 3 weeks after the funeral. I'll never forget it as long as I live. I was in what used to be our bedroom, folding laundry like some kind of domestic servant, when Sarah walked in wearing this ice-cold expression that could have frozen hell over. "We need to talk," she said. And brother, those 4 words have never meant anything good in the history of marriage. I looked up from the pile of shirts, trying to read her face. "What's on your mind, babe?" That's when she dropped the nuclear bomb that obliterated what was left of our marriage. "Find somewhere else to live. I don't care where. You're useless now." Just like that. No build-up, no explanation, no it's not you, it's me bullshit. Just pure, unadulterated venom delivered with the emotional warmth of a parking meter. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, holding one of her silk blouses in my hands, trying to process what I'd just heard. "Excuse me?" I managed to choke out. "You heard me, Darian. You're dead weight. I don't need you anymore. I have everything I want now, and you're just in the way." Behind her, I caught a glimpse of her brother Marcus lurking in the doorway with this satisfied smirk on his face. He'd been hanging around more since Richard's death, whispering poison in Sarah's ear about how she deserved better, how she was meant for bigger things. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. This was the woman I'd sacrificed everything for, the woman I'd worked 60-hour weeks to support while she found herself through expensive hobbies, the woman I'd given up my own dreams for, turning down job opportunities and shelving my ambitions, because her needs always came first. "Sarah, what the hell has gotten into you? We're married. We took vows." "Oh, please." She waved her hand dismissively, like she was shooing away an annoying fly. "Those vows were made when I needed you. Things change. I've changed. My circumstances have changed. You haven't." That night, while Sarah was out celebrating her new independence with Marcus and their country club friends, I packed my entire life into 2 beat-up suitcases and a cardboard box full of photos and mementos. 7 years of shared memories reduced to 3 containers that barely filled the trunk of my old Honda Civic. As I loaded my pathetic belongings into the car, I couldn't help but think about all the compromises I'd made, all the pieces of myself I'd given up to make her happy, the promotion I'd turned down because it would have meant relocating, the friends I'd lost touch with because Sarah didn't approve of them, the hobbies I'd abandoned because they weren't sophisticated enough for her social circle. And for what? To be discarded the moment I was no longer useful. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the casual cruelty of it all. She didn't even have the decency to pretend it was difficult for her. No tears, no apologies, no acknowledgement of what we'd shared. Just cold, calculated dismissal. Like I was an employee being laid off from a job I'd never applied for. Let me tell you about rock bottom. It smells like industrial-strength disinfectant, mixed with the broken dreams of every poor fool who's ever checked into the Sunset Motor Lodge. The place charged $39 a night and had a flickering neon sign that only managed to spell out Sue TMO on a good day. The desk clerk barely looked up when I stumbled through the door with my worldly possessions, just slid a key across the counter and grunted something that might have been Room 12. Room 12 was a masterpiece of budget hospitality. The carpet was this charming shade of what the hell happened here. And the wallpaper was peeling like a bad sunburn. The bed looked like it had been through more relationships than a Hollywood starlet, and the bathroom was less inviting than most crime scenes. But here's the kicker. This dump was paradise compared to the emotional wasteland I'd been living in. I collapsed onto that saggy mattress and just lay there staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked suspiciously like either Jesus or maybe a really sad duck. That's when Sarah's parting gift really started eating at me. Before I'd packed my life into storage containers, she'd tossed me a handful of cash like I was some street performer who'd just butchered a Beatles song. "Here," she'd said, not even looking at me. "This should last you a few weeks until you figure out your next move." $300. 7 years of marriage, and I was worth $300 to her. But lying there, listening to my upstairs neighbor, apparently auditioning for the Olympic furniture throwing team, something started gnawing at me. It wasn't just the humiliation or the betrayal, though those were doing a fine job of eating me alive from the inside. No, it was something else, something that didn't add up. Richard Hayes wasn't the kind of guy who left things to chance. The man had been a perfectionist in everything. His business, his investments, hell, even the way he organized his sock drawer was like something out of a military handbook. He'd planned every detail of his empire with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, built it from the ground up through sheer determination and almost obsessive attention to detail. So why would a guy like that just dump his entire fortune on Sarah and walk away? I'd spent enough time with Richard over the years to know how he really felt about his daughter. Don't get me wrong, he loved her, but he wasn't blind to her faults. The man had built a business empire through hard work and sacrifice, and Sarah's biggest accomplishment was mastering the art of spending other people's money with Olympic-level skill. Richard used to joke about it. "That girl could burn through a fortune faster than Sherman went through Georgia," he'd say with this mix of affection and exasperation that only a parent could manage. He knew she was entitled, knew she was lazy, knew she had about as much business sense as a goldfish. So would a guy like that really just hand over everything to someone he knew would probably blow it all on designer handbags and European vacations? The more I thought about it, the more it bugged me. By 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd managed to convince myself I was losing it. Grief and desperation were making me see conspiracies where there were none. Sarah had inherited everything fair and square, and I was just the discarded husband looking for some kind of cosmic justice that didn't exist in the real world. But when dawn finally crawled through those moth-eaten curtains, I made a decision. Call it curiosity, call it desperation, call it the last pathetic gasps of a man who'd lost everything. I was going to find out the truth. With the few dollars I had left after paying for another night in paradise, I dug out my phone and looked up Charles Whitmore, Richard's longtime attorney. My hands were shaking as I dialed. This was probably going to be the most embarrassing phone call of my life. The pathetic ex-son-in-law fishing for scraps, hoping against hope that maybe there was some kind of mistake, some tiny loophole that might throw me a lifeline. Charles Whitmore's office screamed old money from every mahogany-paneled surface. Walking through those doors felt like stepping into a different century where handshake deals actually meant something. The receptionist informed me that Mr. Whitmore could see me immediately, which should have been my first clue that something was up. In my experience, lawyers don't just drop everything for broke guys who smell like cheap motel soap and desperation, but Charles greeted me like I was the prodigal son returning home for Christmas dinner. "Darian, my boy." He practically jumped up from behind his massive desk. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your wife told me you'd left town." I stopped dead in my tracks. "She told you what?" "Said you'd packed up and moved to Arizona or Nevada, somewhere out west." Said you wanted a fresh start after Richard's passing and didn't want to be contacted about any legal matters. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. That lying, scheming backstabber had been intercepting my mail, screening my calls, basically erasing me from existence while she played queen of the castle. Charles, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been staying at the Sunset Motor Lodge about 15 minutes from here. I never left town, and I sure as hell never told anyone I didn't want to be contacted. The old lawyer's eyebrows shot up so high they practically disappeared into his hairline. He walked over to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick manila folder with Richard's name on it. Son, he said, we need to talk, and I mean right now. Charles settled behind his desk with the folder in front of him, looking at me like he was about to deliver news that would either make my day or ruin my life. Darian, what exactly did Sarah tell you about her father's will? That she inherited everything. The mansion, the money, the whole $33 million empire. Pretty cut and dried, according to her. Charles made a noise that sounded like a cross between a chuckle and a snort. Cut and dried. That's rich. He opened the folder and pulled out what looked like the original will. Thick, official-looking papers with more seals and signatures than a peace treaty. Let me ask you something, son. Did you actually see this alleged will? Were you present at the reading? I thought back to that day. Sarah had come home from the lawyer's office practically glowing with satisfaction, waving some papers around like she'd just won the lottery, but now that I really thought about it, no, I admitted, she said it was family business, that since I wasn't a blood relative I didn't need to be there. She brought home copies of some documents, but I never saw the actual will. Charles shook his head like I just told him I'd bought the Brooklyn Bridge from a guy in a trench coat. Of course she did. He turned the will around so I could see it, and my heart started pounding like I'd just run a marathon. Even upside down, I could see my name mentioned multiple times throughout the document. Darian, he said, according to Richard's actual last will and testament, the one he signed, witnessed, and notarized in this very office. You are the primary beneficiary of his estate. The words hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo load of disbelief. I'm sorry. What? The mansion, 70% of his liquid assets, controlling interest in his business holdings, is all yours, son. Every last penny of it. I stared at the document like it was written in ancient Sumerian. But Sarah said... Sarah was left $10 million, Charles continued, flipping through the pages. A very generous inheritance, mind you, but it came with conditions. What kind of conditions? Charles adjusted his reading glasses and found the relevant section. The bequest to Sarah Hayes Morrison is contingent upon her treatment of her husband, Darian Morrison, following Richard's passing. Should she fail to honor the bonds of marriage and treat her husband with the respect and dignity he deserves, said bequest shall be null and void, and those assets shall revert to the primary beneficiary. My mouth went dry. You're telling me that by throwing me out like yesterday's garbage, she forfeited her entire inheritance? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Charles leaned back in his chair, with something that might have been satisfaction dancing in his eyes. Richard was very specific about this clause. He'd watched his daughter's behavior over the years, seen how she treated you, and he wanted to ensure that his money didn't enable her to become an even worse person than she already was. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. This is insane. Why didn't she know about this? Oh, but she did. Charles pulled out another document, a receipt showing that Sarah had been provided with a complete copy of the will 3 days after the funeral. She received the full, unredacted will. She chose to ignore the conditions, probably thinking they were just her father's way of being dramatic from beyond the grave, so she gambled with $10 million and lost spectacularly. Charles couldn't hide his grin anymore. Richard always said his daughter was too arrogant for her own good. Turns out he was right. Then he pulled out an old-fashioned tape recorder and pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room, weak from illness but unmistakably determined. Darian, if you're hearing this, it means my daughter has shown her true colors. I'm sorry, son. I tried to raise her better, but some people are just born selfish. You've been more family to me these past few years than she ever was. Take care of what I've built. Use it wisely. And don't let her guilt you into giving her a damn penny. She made her choice. The recording ended, and I sat there feeling like I'd just been hit by emotional lightning. In the span of 20 minutes, I'd gone from being a discarded husband, living in a flea-bag motel, to the heir of a multi-million-dollar empire. So, what happens now? I finally managed to ask. Now, Charles smiled like a shark who just spotted a school of particularly tasty fish. We make this official. Within hours, we set everything in motion. Bank accounts were frozen faster than a Minnesota lake in January. Credit cards were canceled with the efficiency of a Swiss train schedule. The utilities at the mansion were all transferred back into my name by close of business. But the real kicker was discovering that Sarah had paid some two-bit document forger $50,000 to create fake will documents using letterheads stolen from Charles's office. She'd paid him with money from Richard's accounts, money that, according to the real will, she never had legal access to in the first place. I decided to take a little drive to what was now officially my house. I pulled up to the mansion just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. The house looked different somehow, smaller, less intimidating. Maybe that's what happens when you realize you actually own something instead of just visiting it. I let myself in with the new keys Charles had given me, and that's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of Sarah having a complete and total meltdown in the kitchen. What do you mean the card was declined? That's impossible. I have millions in that account. I found her standing next to the granite kitchen island, with her phone pressed to her ear, and her face red with the kind of fury that usually precedes someone getting slapped with a restraining order. She was wearing one of her designer outfits, but her usual perfect composure was cracking like cheap paint. When she noticed me standing in the doorway, her face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a lightning storm. "Darian, what are you doing here?" "I live here," I said, pulling out the keys and jingling them just to watch her face contort with confusion. "Remember, this is my house." "Your house? What the hell are you talking about? You inherited jack crap, Sarah." I walked over to the kitchen counter and leaned against it like I owned the place, which I did. "Turns out your daddy left you a nice little allowance, but it came with strings attached. Strings you cut the moment you decided I was useless." The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. "That's impossible." I read the will. Everything was left to me. "You read a forgery, sweetheart. A really expensive, really illegal forgery that's about to land you in more trouble than a turkey on Thanksgiving." As if on cue, her phone started ringing with calls from every bank and credit card company she'd been bleeding dry. I headed toward the door, then stopped and turned back to her. She was still standing there in shock, her phone buzzing with the sound of her entire financial world imploding. "Oh, and Sarah," I said, my hand on the doorknob, "you might want to call a lawyer, a good one. Because forgery and fraud are felonies, and I hear orange really isn't your color." 2 days later, Sarah's carefully constructed world came crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. Her mother, Eleanor, showed up like some Chanel-wearing avenging angel, offering bribes that escalated from $2 million to $5 million to $10 million. When I kept refusing, she made threats about Richard's questionable business practices and federal investigations that could tie up the estate for decades. That's when I learned the truth that changed everything. Richard had been working with the FBI for 2 years as a cooperating witness. All those shady shell companies Eleanor was threatening to expose, they were part of an authorized federal operation to catch actual money launderers and criminals. Richard had helped take down a major criminal network, earning $2.3 million in consulting fees from the government for his cooperation. The FBI asked me to wear a wire during my next meeting with Sarah and Eleanor. They walked right into it, making extortion threats and admitting to multiple federal crimes on recording. When Agent Martinez and her team burst through the door, Eleanor actually asked, "What federal investigation?" Martinez smiled and said, "The one your husband was helping us conduct for the past 2 years." The look on Eleanor's face was priceless, like she'd just discovered gravity was optional and she was about to fall upward into space. Sarah screamed that I'd betrayed her, but I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You tried to erase me from existence, committed fraud, then tried to extort me. I didn't betray you, I just let you hang yourself with your own rope." Sarah got 18 months in federal prison for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. Eleanor got 2 years for the same charges, plus obstruction of justice. They write me letters from prison every week, desperate pleas for forgiveness that I never open. The woman who called her husband useless is probably sharing a cell with someone who appreciates that kind of irony. 6 months later, I'm living in my mansion, running the Richard Hayes Foundation for Family Integrity, helping other people who've been screwed over by greedy relatives and manipulative spouses. Sometimes, I stand on the balcony where Richard used to watch the sunset, holding a glass of his favorite whiskey and thinking about how much has changed. The scared, broken man who packed his life into 2 suitcases is gone, replaced by someone who understands his own worth. And this king isn't interested in ruling through fear or money or manipulation. I'm building something better than an empire. I'm building a legacy that would have made Richard proud. The foundation has already helped dozens of cases in just 6 months. We've assisted wives whose husbands hid assets during divorce proceedings, adult children whose parents were manipulated into changing wills by gold-digging caregivers, and people like me who were written off as worthless until they proved otherwise. Every success story feels like a small victory against the kind of cruelty Sarah showed me. I've also learned more about Richard's double life from Agent Martinez. The man was risking his life every day for 2 years, attending meetings with genuinely dangerous criminals, while wearing wires and gathering evidence. Some of these people were connected to cartels, human trafficking operations, and arms dealers. The $347 million seized was just the tip of the iceberg. They disrupted entire networks of criminal enterprises that had been operating for decades. The most satisfying part? Eleanor's friends in the federal government turned out to be the same agents Richard had been working with. When she bragged about having connections who could make my life difficult, she was unknowingly threatening me with the very people who were grateful for Richard's cooperation. Agent Martinez told me they had a good laugh about that one. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Sarah had just treated me with basic human decency. She would have inherited $10 million, more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. Instead, her greed and cruelty cost her everything. The irony is that if she'd simply been a decent wife, she'd still be wealthy beyond belief, but that required her to see me as a human being rather than dead weight. The letters from prison have gotten more desperate over time. Sarah's latest one claimed she was a different person now, that prison had taught her the value of love and loyalty. Eleanor's letters alternate between rage-filled rants about how I destroyed the family and pathetic attempts at emotional manipulation about how she's just a grieving widow who made mistakes. I never respond, but I do read them occasionally when I need motivation for the foundation. Every sob story they write reminds me of how they showed their true colors when they thought they held all the cards. People don't fundamentally change. They just reveal who they really were all along when the circumstances are right. Marcus, Sarah's brother, who was so smug about my downfall, has been completely radio silent since the arrests. Turns out when your sister and mother are federal criminals, it's harder to maintain that air of superiority. Last I heard, he was dealing with his own financial problems after some questionable business investments. Karma has a way of making the rounds. The mansion feels like home now in a way it never did when I was married to Sarah. I've redecorated everything to reflect who I actually am rather than what I thought I needed to be to fit into their world. The library where Richard and I used to talk has become my favorite room. It's where I do most of my foundation work and where I keep that framed $300 bill. Update for those who will be asking about the criminal network Richard helped expose: 17 arrests, $347 million seized, multiple international crime syndicates disrupted. My father-in-law was basically Batman in a business suit, and I inherited not just his fortune, but his legacy of justice. The $300 Sarah gave me, I framed it with a note, what 7 years of marriage was worth to my ex-wife. It hangs in my office as a reminder of how far I've come and how wrong people can be about your worth.